So they may be the direct route back to the resource recovery facility. So there are some streets that they are on more often. They acknowledge that. They say they route their trucks efficiently as possible. So from a time factor and also from a fuel efficiency standard.
One question I have too is about recycling. It seems like that's a really vital piece of the partnership with Metro Waste. Whether or not we're talking about organized collection, but I think Jerry's point is a good one, that if we require recycling, we're going to double the amount of trucks we've got now, unless they have the capacity for both in the same truck. But I don't see anywhere in here either where we're being asked about requiring recycling. And I'm not saying we have to have that discussion tonight, but I think it's one we need to start thinking through, because I can guess what will happen if it's not a requirement, right? Is that you would have people going with the lowest bidder that's not providing that service, right? Or they'd opt out of that service. And then our landfilling it's bad, right? Then we're throwing metals and glass, things that there is a market for metal and for glass and for cardboard. There's from what I understand, quite a strong market for cardboard. So there are valuable materials, right, that we're landfilling, which is bad for a lot of reasons. So I don't know at what point we need to enter into that discussion, or, if that wasn't really posed as an option here about that concept about requiring residential recycling.
You can anticipate in discussion with Metro Solid Waste that material, they want more, not less.
Yep. That's valuable for them.
It's cash to them.
Yes.
So
I think we need to be aware of that too, though, that's coming, right? Is that what we're talking about is likely going to require residential recycling, right? And then that will affect the haulers who either do or don't provide that service currently, to either increase capacity to offer that service, or that might not be feasible for everyone. But I think we need to know that seems like it's going to be required down the road we're going. So, and many communities do this, right? This is not a new and crazy idea that we have here in Ames to do any of this, even organized collection included, right? This is something they do in other places. So this is not an abnormal thing to consider, requiring recycling as a piece.
So I agree with you, and I thought Jerry's point was well taken. So we've been recycling for a while, but I have to sort of haul our bins to the resource recovery plant once a week, and so part of me really likes the idea of requiring recycling, but then it seems like that's at odds with our goal of reducing the number of trucks on the streets. So I don't have an answer on that.
Well, in my mind, they reconcile with organized collection. I know that, and that's maybe not a concept that you find tolerable, the organized collection concept. But in my mind, that's how you reduce the impact of also requiring recycling, is by chunking off the city into zone, like the proposal. And I keep hearing the same misconception maybe. In the staff report, when it talked about organized collection, it said pretty explicitly we would not have just one service provider in Ames. And so I've heard that in emails. I got a phone call today. People are like, I hear you're going with just one provider. That'll be a monopoly. And maybe it's splitting hairs if 2 or 3 is different than 1. But I just want to clear that up. If people keep hearing that is incorrect. The staff report explicitly said we wouldn't just have one hauler. But again, in my mind, that's how it reconciles with requiring recycling, is a more organized system for collection. And maybe we could do it in a way that maximizes the number of people that are able to stay in business in Ames, while still divvying up the town somehow. So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
So am I remembering correctly that our code in the past required haulers to pick up twice a week, right? We changed that, didn't we, to once a week? But we still have a code that mandates that haulers have to come even if Jerry's waste bin isn't full. So even looking at something like that could make a difference. So I think there are things to explore in the future. And I guess I would also say, in response to John's point, I am looking forward to seeing what our staff can come up with for innovations, because we have some tremendous people, like Brian said, that are solving problems on a regular basis in our facilities. And when I think about the things that could come out of staff being turned loose on addressing some of those challenges, it's kind of exciting to me that we may have a different future than what we currently have right now, with the plant having challenges and the natural gas not being compatible with many of the systems and the corrosion and downtime. But the one thing that does make all of that status quo, or even building a new facility, less attractive to me, is that we would be looking at least a 4-year timeline to build a facility and have it permitted, and yet we're going to run out of landfill space because Boone County is not going to be accepting our municipal solid waste as of 13 months from now? And that's not 4 years from today. So I think we have a near-term problem that we need to address. And so from my perspective, looking at our options for a transfer station and then trying to sort out the organized collection issue is the direction that I would like to see us heading, because I think we could make incremental moves in the right direction if we open conversations and find out what Metro Waste Authority is willing to do. Asking those questions doesn't lock us into anything, and I think it can help us make more informed decisions. And I also think that we do want to look at some of the things that Jerry brought up, and the cost that Carl brought up to the haulers to supply the bins that we need for recycling. I mean, all of those things are associated costs that we need to take into consideration in our decision making. So I'm just looking at tonight as the first step in the right direction, where we're trying to determine which direction we want to pursue.
Okay. Anita or Rachel, do you have anything else you want to, or anything you want to add before I ask for a motion?
I was just going to say, and as I understand it, this is just a first step. We have partners that we would need to be communicating with within Story County to see what their thoughts are about some of this, and that even with Boone landfill, that if we would extend longer, they would have some responsibility, but that's not an excuse for us to not move forward, which I'm interested in doing as well.
Rachel?
Yeah, I would just echo a lot of what's been said already. I'm kind of interested in learning more about this, and I know there will be challenges, especially if we do go further down the organized collection route, but I do think that's an opportunity for innovation and finding the best practice of how to do that. So I'm interested in having more conversations on that.
All right, so I entertain a motion from somebody on how you want to proceed tonight.
I would move that we ask staff to explore with Metro Waste Authority whether the organized collection component would be required for them to do business with us, and just to learn more about what kinds of options are available if we work with them.
And
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion.
does your motion, it's not, so that there won't be a separate second motion about the consolidation disposal. That's just part of your motion is also,
It's all
Yeah.
part of the same motion
No,
because I think,
good clarification. I heard nothing about consolidation and disposal. It was just collection.
that's what I heard.
okay,
So-
so I was assuming the whole package
Ah,
because that's how I've been envisioning
All
this.
Would you read the motion back, and then maybe we can get a friendly amendment and without redoing the whole thing.
So ask staff to explore the Metro Waste Authority, whether the organized collection would be required to do business with them, and learn more about what options are available if we choose to.
Okay, so I thought my options available encompass the consolidation and the disposal aspects.
May I suggest, maybe if you want to just insert that, or that
What
one-
options are available to us for collection, consolidation, and disposal
Very good.
if we work with them?
you fine with that second?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
One point about this, it was interesting to learn from Thor tonight that Ankeny continues to have a subscription basis and works with Metro Waste. I didn't know that there were other communities that were doing that. So I'm encouraged that that's at least with one community that's an option.
that was Gap.
But maybe we need to have something more official from them.
Steve,
Right.
I had a question too.
go ahead.
Your motion also didn't say anything about asking him the piece about requiring recycling. That was not part of your motion?
It's not part of the motion because I sort of assumed that's
They
their
will
business
tell us
model.
that. Okay. If it comes up in discussions, I just want to make sure we have a good understanding of their expectation for recycling.
And maybe do that in a second motion. I'd be
Abs-
supportive of that in a
okay.
second motion.
Yeah, maybe I will just
that'll
to be
be-
clear to ask them.
There'll be a lot of issues. It's the whole model itself. We'd have to talk about how it's going to work.
Okay. So
From
you think,
billing, who bills it, mandatory differential rates. I mean, we'll have to talk about all those
okay.
options.
So you think it'll come up as part of it?
Definitely
Okay.
will, I think.
All right. I trust you. That's
There's just so many more issues that
Yeah.
we'll have to talk about.
It would seem that the motion is based on page 1 of the memo where collection, consolidation, disposal is described. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So I think staff has a clarity in terms of this is what is being considered, which includes recycle, yard waste, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, good one.
All right? All right, those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. Anything else that you find, gentlemen, need from us tonight?
So one other piece of this that Greg brought up that I want to make sure that we follow up on. What we're doing tonight doesn't just affect Ames. So we're 2/3 of the population of Story County, and what we do here might well impact the other communities. Steve, is it fair to say that this future discussion with Metro Waste Authority is necessarily going to include the impacts on the other communities in Story County, or is that something that we need to explore?
You mean the impacts?
Separately.
I think we're going to take into account, continue to provide service to those areas. Is that what you're asking?
Correct.
Yes. And whether we handle them the same way or differently, I don't know. We'll have to talk about that. But yes, we're assuming they're still partners in it, and still an obligation to serve them.
Right.
How we serve them, I don't know. Maybe different, maybe the same. And of course, if we came back and we probably wouldn't want to ask you to make a final decision until we had those communities input too, but we have to have a proposal to bring before them. We just don't have that yet.
Okay.
I do know we have agreements with those communities. You remember, if we do a transfer station, it still may require a bond issue or debt, and it may require those cities to decide whether they want to extend their agreement with us to cover the same length of this new debt. So they'll have a chance to decide if they want to stay in or not.
So if I can read an excerpt from the last month's staff report at the very end, there's an indication that if the council agrees with this approach, which generally you have, Staff would also begin to examine financing, construction, regulatory, partnership agreements, and other related matters in greater detail, including consulting with the existing resource recovery system partnering communities regarding these potential changes. Staff would then return to the city council with this information as necessary to implement the council's direction. So we will do that. We will have conversations with the partners, and we will bring all of that back to you.
There's a lot of work to be done here, as you can see. That's why getting started on it is important.
Well, and I don't want anybody, leastwise the haulers, to think that that motion means that I completely support an organized system, because I don't know. I need to have more information, which is why I asked for us to investigate that as one option.
All right.
There's one other thing. This is not a motion, but it's just maybe putting a pin in something that I mentioned to Brian and Steve when we had our meeting this week to prepare for council. And that is, I would like to think that there's an opportunity for us, possibly depending on where if we get a new transfer facility, where we site it, for us to have a space created where we can have some of that diversion activity that the Rummage Rampage offers, and perhaps have ongoing sales of items like ISU Surplus does on a more regular basis, so that people who come into the community and need a table or chairs might find them at that diversion facility. But that's just a pin in the conversation for the future.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Move on to item number 30.
I have one quick question.
Yes.
And it is just about our 6 big moves. I imagine you will be referring to some of the information there as you're preparing, that there are things about gas emissions and the importance of looking at reduction and recycling and all those things. So you'll be sort of looking at that document, that climate action document in addition.
Yes,
Okay.
as we
Thank you.
explore things in more detail, we'll have more information about that.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Kelly?
Thank you.
Good evening. Tonight we have a staff report that was prepared in response to multiple issues that City Council discussed at a workshop in March of 2023. And we're at the final 2 implementation steps of infill housing opportunities. There's 2 topics that we're addressing tonight. One of them is the discussion of creating an option for what's called a pocket neighborhood or a cottage neighborhood. This would be a version of a PUD that's really designed as an infill tool. You could probably create one of these now in a PUD, but you have to have at least a 2-acre site to do that. So that would really just be greenfield new development that's able to do that. So what we're proposing is to look at modifying the PUD overlay to allow for infill sites under 2 acres to then take advantage of the PUD overlay. And it's specifically going to have development standards defined around the concept of the pocket neighborhood, which is really organizing smaller structures in a condensed format or a very small lot format around a common open space. So it's organized around some kind of grouping of landscaped open space in the middle. It's not so much about individual lot area and private yards and things along those lines. So the private space would be really small, more like a postage stamp lot around a building. You may or may not even have parking with your house. It might be in a detached garage across an alley or something. That we would, with council's direction tonight, we would work in a text amendment to the PUD overlay. It would define this use. So it's going to be definitely geared at infill. So you're looking at, again, we've been working through this a number of times. The Harrison site that we talked about a month ago, it may or may not be a pocket neighborhood. It's a site under 2 acres. But if you did want to look at that for different kinds of small lots or for infill, you're going to have to look at at changing the PUD overlay, or we're just not going to get small sites that have any variability to them. So we're supporting looking at that through that infill lens tonight. And then the second item is a little bit different. It's defining another dwelling. Important in our zoning ordinance, the way it's written now, is dwelling, and there's multiple kinds. There's single family, there's two family, and then there's apartments. They all also lead to different development standards, either for density or for parking for the most part. So one of the common things that we've seen is probably an interest in creating what many people would call a townhome, which is not a defined type of anything. It's just a style of housing for the most part. And it's what we all envision. It's more of a vertically oriented unit, likely 2 stories, but you have shared sidewalls, but nobody above or below you. So what we're proposing is to add to the zoning ordinance, and this is kind of a temporary measure until we get into a zoning ordinance update that probably looks at things a little bit differently, is to create, again, an infill tool where a lot that's probably like a 1/4 acre in size, maybe a little bit larger, is able to do somewhere between 3 to 5, maybe 6 of these townhome units, but they'd likely be perpendicular to the street. So there might be one unit that's at the street and then a row that goes back from there. And we have a few examples in town. There's in the last 5 years, a couple of these smaller 3 or 4 unit projects have been built in the South Lincoln mixed use area, like around 3rd Street. There's a project on Hayward near Campus Town where a few apartment units were built that way. Now, again, they're treated as apartments now, but the complication for them is the parking requirement. So we require 1 parking space for every apartment bedroom in an apartment project, which works fine for the larger apartment complexes. It does make infill, again, always tricky. You're going to hear from me for the next 2 years that parking is going to be the decision maker on a lot of infill projects. So if we require it, not a lot of density, or it won't happen. If we reduce it, you might see infill projects. So the point of this is to address 2 things. One, it creates a defined different building from an apartment so that we can lower the parking rate. Our proposal is that if you build attached parking, like a 2-car garage or a 1-car garage in another space, we can limit your total parking to 2 spaces. So that helps make a 3-bedroom townhome very marketable, because you only had to provide the number of spaces you would normally fit in that footprint of the structure and not have to build a parking lot somewhere else. It's possible you might have 1 or 2 guest parking spaces on a site. It might depend on how that works, but the big key is that we are reducing the total parking to 2 for a 3-bedroom townhome. And I think that works for both rental and for ownership. We would only require 2 spaces now if it was a individually lotted single family attached unit. So it could look exactly the same, but we would require more parking if it's on a common lot instead of on individual lots. They both can be rented, only need 2 spaces by rental code, but by zoning, we're treating them differently. So we're proposing for infill to remedy that with another building type. Now, the second piece of that is, the second part of the infill conversation has always been about the context of the design. We're trying to make sure our building types fit in the neighborhood. And we talked about really trying to avoid blank walls. In our workshop discussion, we brought up Denver, who had a lot of infill priorities, and they ended up with a lot of poorly designed buildings that were all about density and built a lot of blank walls towards the street and just made really a non-residential habitable environment. So the pushback on that is always to make sure you have front facade facing features on end units. So we're proposing that with that townhome dwelling type, it will include a design expectation, some guidelines similar to our duplex guidelines that we just had about front door orientation, and some kind of relief to go along with that. So ideally, we're getting the front of a building, or at least features of the front of a building, on an end unit. And then there's more units stacked behind, which would not have any other particular design expectations. So those 2 things would really kind of help kickstart some infill options, I think. I think I can see this building type fitting in some of the West Campus and possibly some South Campus neighborhoods. We talked about redirection areas at the last meeting, and you asked us to look at the South Campus one as the first priority. This might be a building type that works there. It definitely would be a building type that'll eventually work in the West Campus redirection area when we get to that kind of a study. So tonight, I'm just looking for council to initiate those 2 text amendments for staff as we've described them in this report. Staff will incorporate them into our work as we do some other projects with text amendments this summer. So it's not necessarily redefining the work plan. There's no public outreach strategy for this. It's to just put it into the zoning ordinance and make it available to developers to use. Any questions or direction?
Questions?
I have two questions, one of which is just a kind of basic nuts and bolts thing. When we're talking about the pocket neighborhoods, I'm trying to envision how many of our standard lots are in 1 acre.
I would say, you talking about like a new development neighborhood or an older one? I
But
would
we're
say,
talking infill, right? So
I would say it's about, on a gross basis, about 3 houses per acre. The lot sizes might be 4 per acre. You can get much smaller ones, like in like some of the old town ones are just
Right,
longer
right.
lots, so they're narrower, but their total lot area is still fairly large. So that's always the difference, is how deep the lots are more than the width. So 3 to 4, we would say like Old Town averages over 5 units per acre, but you have multifamily units mixed in there as well.
okay, and then there's a note that says that we would have to determine which zoning districts to allow the townhome dwelling type to be acceptable for.
Yeah, so the last step, and I don't think we were really prepared to kind of review neighborhoods tonight. So that's why I'm going to say, once we've actually drafted the actual townhome standard, you may want to, just like you did with duplexes, make it available to any zoning district. So you may want to add it to RL, and it might be an alternative to doing a duplex is to be able to do 3 townhome units. We brought up at one point the example on Northwestern, there's 3 townhome units that are kind of staggered along there. That's something that fits perfectly fine in that neighborhood. It's a medium density neighborhood, but it could be in any single family neighborhood. So we might decide at the end of this that that style probably is better when it's 3 units facing the street rather than the perpendicular version that's going to be denser in the medium density areas. So eventually I want to get to that topic, but I want to define the standards first so that we're all sure what we're talking about and we can look at the neighborhoods and see if they really fit that way.
Great.
Other questions?
Kelly, I'm very supportive of anything we can do to put more tools in the toolbox. I am curious, are these proposals tonight consistent with what you're seeing in peer communities, the metro area? Do they have these kind of options available?
I think the pocket neighborhood's kind of a niche product. You don't see people write zoning ordinance standards around them very often because they're just not really popular enough to really write code around it. And I think people use PUDs for that on a regular basis if necessary. There's not a lot of examples in Iowa of pocket neighborhoods. There's only a couple, and a few that claim that wouldn't even be the pure kind of clustered organization. That might just be a long green space with a bunch of houses around it. The townhome thing, I think, is a progressive element of zoning updates that is going on kind of nationwide, trying to address missing middle housing, trying to break apart the very restrictive nature of certain things that aren't meant to apply in smaller contexts. So I think a lot of cities haven't dealt with it yet. I think newer zoning codes are dealing with it. And the idea of defining more building types so you can get more defined features in them and clearer expectations is definitely the trend you're seeing in zoning ordinance updates.
And by asking this, it's certainly not a requirement that we do what other communities have done. I like the idea that you're seeing an opportunity. It shows initiative on your part, and the fact that we're innovative may mean other communities follow us, which I love. I have a pragmatic question. When you look at the pocket neighborhood example, you've got a common area in the center, and the model that we use now for subdivisions is that you have generally a lot more houses that are involved in a homeowner association that would take care of the management of that green space. And I'm just curious to get your thoughts if there were only, I don't know, 10 houses, 8 to 10 houses in that space. Do you foresee any kind of challenges with having a critical mass to maintain the common space?
I think the space is actually pretty small in these models. We're not talking about some of the larger types of green spaces. It might only be 50 feet wide and maybe 80 feet deep. So it might not be a large area. So from like a landscape maintenance perspective, I don't really see it as any inordinate costs. I think with the cost of private streets, parking, all of that, alleys, those are things that are not uncommon in developments. It's going to be a little bit more, obviously, if there's fewer people to shoulder that cost, but I still don't think it's going to be that much of a cost that breaks the viability of the model.
And who would own the green space?
It would be owned in common.
So there wouldn't be like a lot of times our HOAs actually own the green space. So, so would you conceptualize this as that owner of lot 1 would have an undivided
Probably not.
ownership
I
of
would
that?
say it's probably an outlot like what you're typically seeing. It's probably outlot A owned by the Cottage Grove Neighborhood Association, and you're paying your dues for the maintenance of it. That's
Right.
probably the way it goes,
Right.
rather than a shared common interest.
Right. And so I've seen a couple of these. I'm trying to think of one in Slater where it was so small, it was difficult to get people engaged with participating. So I'm interested in this, but that's just one thing that I pragmatically, I think would be challenging. And then as you look at the map of Ames today, best case scenario, do you have just a ballpark on the number of lots that or parcels that this could be dropped into today, just to give us
For
a
pocket neighborhoods.
Mhm.
Very, very few. Because you need to, I mean, you really have to have almost an acre to start with to get to 6 units. And then from there, trying to find a vacant acre sized parcel, there's just not very many of those. Or an underutilized parcel. It's an acre in size with one house that you might be able to tear down and replace with 5 or 6. There are not many of those lots.
Yeah. So there's a big space on South 3rd that I was really interested at one point of seeing it becoming a pocket park. I mean, there aren't a lot of lots like that. I agree with you. And you caption this as an infill, which I think is really interesting. But I think there might be some interest in new developments having a part of the larger whole. Someone might be interested in exploring that, including this. Could this be used in a new development as well?
It can. There's no issue with it being in a new development. The bar that's being lowered for infill is the site size. So like today, you
Right.
could do this in greenfield development because your overall development's probably over 2 acres to start with. Because no one's developing 2-acre subdivisions
right.
on the edge of the city. So you could do this now on the edge of the city, and this won't change that option for somebody.
Well,
So if
that's
you
what-
wanted to break out a little pocket neighborhood in your standard subdivision, that's not a problem.
That's the concept that Ansley is pursuing after. It's not exact. But
Yeah, it's not exactly this. It's focused on a lot more common area than it is lot area. But it's not clustered in this.
Right.
They have a product version that's yet to be built. In a later phase, it's a little bit more like this. Yes.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, staff presented on page 3 of their report a request for 2 motions if council wants to pursue text amendments. Is there support for number 1 and number 2 on the instead of reading the whole thing out loud?
I would move that we direct staff to come back with the 2 text amendments listed in the staff report.
Second.
Can I just clarify? Do you mean proceed with the text amendments or bring
Yes.
back a draft?
Oh, sorry. Proceed with.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Okay. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, move on. Item number 31. Chief Huff.
Good evening. So I am here tonight to discuss the liquor license for Solea, which is a restaurant. The Alcoholic Beverages Division, Alcoholic Beverages, Iowa Department of Revenue is considering action against Salea's liquor license due to a number of compliance check violations. So they're considering the potential of either a revocation or potentially surrender of the license. So a review of our police records for the past 12 months found 4 consecutive compliance check failures, and those were September 30 of 23, November 3rd of 2023, November 17 of 2023, and February 23 of 2024. So those are the 4 in a row. And you know how we conduct compliance checks. We send a person under the age of 21 into the establishment. They attempt to purchase alcohol, and the business would pass the compliance check if they rightly don't sell alcohol to the minor, and obviously they fail if they do. After the 3rd violation, we actually met with the owner to speak with them about these violations, just making sure that he was aware of what was happening, and he seemed to be aware. We offered the ID trainings along with IPAC training. It's worth noting only 1 employee at that time had ever attended one of our training sessions. And I did also want to point out that they did pass 1 follow-up compliance check on April 12th of 2024. So due to those 4 compliance check failures in about 6 months, ABD is moving forward with sanctions. So the ownership of Salea has offered to surrender their license for a period of time. Surrendering their license would allow Salea to reapply for a license once that surrender period has expired. I think what it would save them from is potentially the 1-year revocation period that's in Iowa code. And also, we've discussed before, the license holder, if revoked, can also not apply for 2 years. So it's 1-year business, 2-year for the license holder. So ABD is actually seeking City Council's opinion prior to finalizing any settlement with Salea. They're trying to decide whether to move forward with revocation or some period of surrender, and they would like your input if you desire a period of surrender, what that time frame might be, and after that time period, if you would be willing then to renew a license for the establishment, which I think is very hard for you to answer because it's not a matter before you, but they have asked. So Iowa code, as you know, states that a 4th violation involving sale of alcohol to a person under legal age within 3 years shall result in revocation of the license. And that's what code says. Therefore, it's my recommendation that we ask ABD to move forward with the revocation. However, you have 3 alternatives that we've provided. The first one would be to do that very thing, is just to ask them to move forward with revocation like we've done in the past for other businesses that are similarly situated. You could also recommend a period of time for surrender for Salea's license, and once that's over, they could apply for a license. It would come before you, and then you would have to decide what you wanted to do with that. Or a third alternative is you can take no action or provide guidance to ABD and let them decide what they would like to do with the license. So those are your options, I guess. It is worth noting that their license expires on July 10th. So that's about a month away. So one way or the other, this was going to come before you soon. I'd be happy to answer questions if I can.
Is this one any different in that the state is considering a negotiation with them, whereas in the other examples we've had, I don't remember that was negotiations that they had even entered into?
I'm not aware of, in the recent past at least, a negotiation like this with a negotiated surrender of the license. At least I'm not aware of it.
So that would be a little bit of a unique circumstance in this case, or?
Yeah, I don't think it's unheard of to be done, but certainly not something I would recommend.
Okay. Thank you.
It seems very curious that state law says shall result in revocation. It doesn't say if ABD decides they want to. So do you find that curious also as to why they're even asking us to participate or council to participate in actually not following what the Iowa code says?
I believe it's because they were approached by Salea's attorney as a possible way to settle this without a lot of delays. As you know, in the past, at least, when a license has, when you've denied a license, the process can take some time, sometimes up to 2 years to even get to the point where they're actually not able to sell alcohol anymore. So I think this is their offer to try and remedy some of that by voluntarily surrendering their license.
Okay.
But you're right, the code does say shall.
So I have a question, which may be for, I see Jane's here. Maybe it's for her, because it is a legal question. So if the ABD is approaching us for an opinion and we give an opinion on it, does that open us up for litigation?
I wouldn't expect it to, because I don't believe ABD, our opinion binds them to any sort of decision. I can't see how our weighing in would necessarily affect potential litigation. Just to go back a little bit in the conversation. So I've had conversations with the attorney for ABD, and it is common in communities around the state for the cities to desire a settlement rather than for ABD to go forward with revocation, because the premise, the actual locale, it's not just the business that can't hold a license for that period. It's the premise itself can't hold a license for a year. So a lot of communities are reluctant to lose that possibility of a business being able to operate.
Any other questions?
Jeff, was there evidence that Salaya had actually made changes to their processes or anything when they passed the compliance check in April?
Not really. I don't know what was different, I guess, in April than the first 4 situations. I know in the first 2 compliance check failures, the employee asked for ID and sold anyway. And in the second 2, they didn't ask for ID at all. So in my opinion, at least they got worse. And they should have gotten at least somewhat better after getting a violation. That should really get your attention. So I'm not sure what the difference was with April. Hopefully we got their attention by now.
Well, between the February failure and the April check, they got the notice from ABD of suspensions for their second and third violations.
All right.
Chief, I just a question. I just feel like we're spending so much time on these matters. And my perspective on this is that we be consistent in the way in which we deal with these. What's challenging about this is that there are always little variations between them. And so I always ask a very similar softball question to you, but just for the sake of checking the box, do you feel like that the proposals you're giving us are consistent with the way in which we've treated similar businesses?
I do. This is 4 compliance check failures in 6 months. That is terrible. And compliance checks are pretty easy to pass. It is taking an identification. We're not trying to trick them. They're taking an ID, they're making that calculation, and they're figuring out whether they can sell. And in 2 of these cases, they didn't even ask for an ID. So it's hard for me to have a lot of sympathy.
And we have a letter from the attorney for the owner, and I'm sympathetic with the argument about the economic impact on a small business in a location that has been a revolving door. So all of those things hit pay dirt with me, but the attorney doesn't begin to address the failures of their client to comply with the law. It's just sort of an odd letter to me, and I was hoping that there would be some effort to try to offer an explanation, and maybe there just isn't one. And so my concern, I wish the attorney was here, was that if we set a precedent of leniency in these situations, it sends the wrong message to the other organizations that are working hard to stay in compliance. So it puts us in a very difficult spot.
But isn't this ultimately ABD's decision? I don't understand why we're talking about it, because it's not a licensure question
Right.
like the others
Right.
that we've had,
No, I
which is
agree.
our jurisdiction. So
Yeah.
I'm curious as to why we might want to do alternative 1 as opposed to alternative 3 and just say, ABD, make your decision, because this is ultimately your case.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the 4 compliance checks being failed
Right.
within 6 months, and I am not sympathetic with that. But if they brought that license renewal to us, then that would be a ball in our court. This feels like the ball bounced over from somebody else's court, and
We just
now we're
throw
going
it
to
back.
play it.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
I think partially it's what Jane alluded to, is that some communities don't like to go for the revocation. And so I think they're just asking if you're open to a different thing than revocation. Because I'm assuming if you were open to it, then they would pursue that route.
And option 3 might imply to them that we are too, though, just to take no action. I don't know.
So just a point of clarification, I forwarded to you this email from the attorney that through this letter, and she had intended on coming, and she said that she became sick this afternoon and just was no way she could appear. So she asked that this be presented so you could all see it, and that represents her, her opinion. So. I think that it seems there's just been an increasing amount of violations in our community of not checking IDs. And while I have no vote, it would just seem to me that a strong message needs to be sent that it's not okay, and that alternative number 1 would be sending that message that, look, we want you to be in business, but you need to comply. And I'm still just in shock that they would even ask when it says shall revoke. That just means that if that department can go ahead and make exceptions, well, then everything gets thrown to the wind, doesn't it? I mean, that means when something says shall someplace else, I guess we can go ahead and ask somebody. I'm just being, I mean, it just doesn't make any, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're right.
It just, I know this council's been very concerned about violations in other institutions, or other businesses.
Well, the state has they've got kind of a conflicting desire going here, right? Because they want to they have passed laws that regulate the sale of alcohol, but they also are the liquor distributor in the state. So in a sense, the state has dual conflicting interests. They want to keep the alcohol flowing, but they also regulate it. So, maybe, I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but they are the liquor warehouser in the state of Iowa.
All right. Well, open up public comment. Is there anyone else who wants to address council on this topic tonight? Seeing none, and also making note in the minutes, Grace, that a letter was received by council and reviewed from the Salea's attorney. All right, I entertain a motion.
I'm going to move alternative 3. And if you all don't want to support that, that's okay. But I don't think it's our jurisdiction.
I would second that for a vote.
All right.
So
Yeah.
maybe Jane, can you weigh in on this? I mean, the staff have recommended alternative 1. I'm sympathetic with Gloria's motion, and I'm compelled, but could you explain why the staff's recommending alternative 1?
It's because of consistency. So based on past council actions, the types of violations we're talking about, short time frame for council's consistent types of action, we felt alternative one most aligned with past actions.
Okay, thanks.
But those past actions were taken for approval of a license, right? So this is
This is a little different.
It's
Yes, I would agree.
a very different situation. I don't know that we've had it before.
Yeah, this is a tricky one for me, but I think she
Yeah.
explained it well too. So I'll probably actually vote nay, even though I seconded it. Just
Knock yourself out.
yeah, thanks.
All right. Roll call.
Nay.
Nay. Nay.
Nay.
Aye.
Nay.
All right, we'd move option one.
Second.
And while I'm sympathetic to Celaya in the sense that they're a business and this will impact them, they did have plenty of warning. And yeah, I mean, you get that first violation, you should be really paying attention. And I hope other businesses learn from this, I guess, before it happens to them too, or, learn to be more diligent.
Roll call.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, move on to item number 32, hearing on zoning text amendment for the zoning ordinance for a new exception and related standards for outdoor storage in general industrial zoning district. Benjamin?
Good evening.
Evening.
Council directed staff earlier this year to create an exception in the general industrial zoning district for outdoor storage. This was at the request of Kiwanis, which is operating a facility on East Lincoln Way that is currently in violation of the existing zoning code. Staff has crafted that exception, which would then allow Kiwanis to apply for the exception, which would be heard and decided by the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And staff does recommend approval.
Any questions for Benjamin?
Are there any implications for the question that Kiwanis raised about not moving the trailer?
This would allow them to keep, they would be able to keep the existing operations in place as they are through the application process.
But even across the property line?
Because we talked about this at length internally and talked with legal, and because it is it's not a structure, because it's a trailer, we could allow it to, initially we didn't think we could. After consideration and looking at the code further, we decided we could allow the trailer to be parked across the property line because it is not a structure.
Thank you.
All right, I declare the public hearing on this item to be open. I have one person that's indicated interest. Mr. Witt?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Due to the late hour, I'm going to keep this really short. On behalf of the Kiwanis Club, I'd like to thank the mayor, city council members, and the city staff for helping work through this issue and helping to try and make our paper recycling program continue to work. We've reviewed the proposed text amendment. We met with Benjamin yesterday to make sure we understood the amendment and what the process would be to apply for an exemption. I'm just here to state that we support this amendment as it's written, and I'd like to commend the efforts of Benjamin to help us through this process. This is all new to us, and he did a stellar job, and we'd like to thank you again, and our charities that we support would also like to thank you for your support.
Thank you. Anybody else want to address council? All right, declare the public hearing to be closed. Entertain a motion on first reading of text amendments to the general industrial GI zoning district in section 29.901 and the exception standards in section 29.1506 as shown in attachment C.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Very good. Thanks, Benjamin. Thank you.
You guys should get some kind of award. Your matter's always been at the end of the meeting every time, so I wish we had some kind of brownie points for you, but thanks for your endurance.
Thank you. All right, I'll move on. Now, item number 33, hearing on rezoning of 2212 Oakwood and adjacent right-of-way from agricultural to suburban residential, low-density floating zone.
Pretty straightforward request. We have an oversized legacy parcel from a farmstead that would like to rezone from ag to residential to facilitate a house addition. No other developments proposed. You waived a master plan requirement for this earlier. We're recommending approval because no real development potential exists other than the single family home that's there.
Thank you, Kelly. Questions? Hearing none, declare the public hearing on this item to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address City Council on this topic? Seeing none, declare the public hearing to be closed. Entertain motion on first reading of ordinance.
Move on first.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Move on to item number 34, hearing on nuisance assessment. Any questions for staff on this particular item? Hearing none, declare public hearing on nuisance assessment for the identified address to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council? Seeing none, declare public hearing to be closed. Entertain motion on resolution assessing costs of snow and ice removal and certifying assessments to Story County Treasurer.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Move on to item number 35, another nuisance assessment. Questions for staff? Hearing none, declare the public hearing on the nuisance assessment for (2412) Camden Drive to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this topic? Seeing none, declare the public hearing on this item to be closed. Entertain motion resolution assessing costs of sidewalk repair, replacement, and certifying assessments to the Story County Treasurer for property located at 2412 Camden Drive.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Move on to item number 36. The 2024-2025 right-of-way restoration program. Declare a public hearing on this item to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this topic? Seeing none, declare a public hearing to be closed. Any questions for staff?
Do we have any idea why the bid is so low? I mean, significantly below engineer's estimate.
Seat is cheap.
Well, there was second one that was only a few thousand above it, so that was encouraging to see. But
Yeah.
all right, entertain a motion accepting report of bids.
So moved.
So moved.
Moved by Rollins, seconded by Garten. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Entertain motion resolution approving the final plan specifications and awarding the contract to Alpha Landscapes of Johnston, Iowa in the amount of $108,985.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, item 37, there, our 2024-2025 Clearwater Diversion Program, Douglas Avenue, 14th Street to 16th Street project. And declare a public hearing on this item to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this project? Seeing none, hearing none, declare the hearing to be closed. Entertain a motion on report of accepting bids.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. And entertain a motion on resolution approving final plan specifications and awarding a contract to Iowa Water and Waste Systems of Ames, Iowa in the amount of $90,681.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 All right, moving on, item number 38, zoning text amendment to allow for 20% alternative design adjustments to general and base zoning development standards. Any questions for Kelly on this one? I declare the public hearing on this item to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this topic? Seeing none, hearing none, declare the public hearing to be closed. Entertain a motion on first reading of ordinance.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 And item number 39, zoning text amendment on updates to Chapter 9 floodplain zoning regulations. Any questions for staff? Declare the public hearing to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this topic? Seeing and hearing none, declare the public hearing to be closed. Entertain motion on first reading of ordinance.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Move on to item number 40, entertain motion on second reading of ordinance on zoning text amendment to allow mixed-use development in the Research and Innovation Zoning District, ISU Research Park.
Move on second.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Item number 41, entertain motion on third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4530 on zoning text amendment for purpose of including rock climbing facilities as a miscellaneous use within the general industrial zoning district by special use permit.
Move on third.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And item number 42, entertain motion on third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4531, amending chapter 18.7A of the municipal code, special penalty for game day parking to add event parking.
Move on third.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right. Move on to report of governing bodies. Any reports from Discover Ames?
We have not met since last meeting.
Thank you. AEDC, any updates?
I will hold off until after Friday because we'll have a second update and I can give them both.
Very good. Thank you. Story County Emergency Management has not met since the last report that was given. How about Transit Board?
Nope.
All right. Let's move on to disposition of communications to council before we go into council comments. We have 6 items. First is a copy of a letter that John Joyner sent in response to Fellows Elementary Leadership Group Bike Safety Survey. I think this is just for your information that they followed up. Is there any action that you're interested in taking on this one? Otherwise, we'll consider this item be just for your information. Okay. Number 2, some suggestions regarding URAB. A letter or an email back to him, thanking him for his input seemed to be appropriate, if that's acceptable to council, or do you have other suggestions?
Did we do something with his 2022 email that suggested these same things?
I don't remember that we did.
I would move that we send a message thanking him for
Okay.
his input and we'll keep it in mind.
Thank you. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Third is email from Stacy Wooder regarding some campus town concerns. Seemed that it may be appropriate to.
That was a staff response on those?
Yes, I think there's an issue that I think we need to give you some options on and get some direction on the council, how you want to handle some of these issues.
Move we put that on a future agenda?
No, a memo
Oh, a memo.
first,
I would
then
move
we
we get a memo from staff.
Second.
Thank you.
That's the one where we had gotten the memo.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. The next one from Jerry Neal, I think it was more or less just for your information prior to our tonight's conversation. Next, Public Works Engineering, Welch Avenue tree trenches.
That's just info, right? That's what I was thinking.
I think that unless you want to see something else done differently.
It sounded to me like they have a plan that they're going to
Better than
work on.
Okay.
status quo.
Very good. And number 6 is email from Mr. Stodden, Director of Good Neighbors Emergency Assistance, and Aaron Ruerts, Story County General Assistance regarding financial assistance for tenants.
I think you need to get a memo, or depending on the time, maybe even on a future agenda. This is in relationship to declaration of a building be dangerous, and it will require, I think I gave you a memo on that. It'll require the displacement of the tenants, and we're concerned about, this is a group that may need some type of assistance, what's available for them, how we can help. I think Paul will present something to you in either a memo form, or if we don't have time, maybe we'll even put it on another agenda if we have to move more quickly.
Move that we ask for a,
Well, either a memo, or we'll put the memo on the agenda, depending if we have enough time.
so moved.
Second.
Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, council comments. Gloria?
We have the Juneteenth, Ames and Story County Juneteenth celebration coming up on Saturday at Bandshell Park from 12:30 to, is it 5:30, Anita, or 5?
5.
12:30 to 5. So we'd like to see folks come out and enjoy the day.
Thank you. Tim?
A couple things tonight. The next 2 weekends, Finding Nemo comes to the Ames Municipal Auditorium. Be Friday, Saturday, Sunday shows. Fantastic young people putting this on. And then I wanted to respond a little bit to Grant Olson's comment in the public forum. I want to respectfully disagree with his assessment that our city staff is not taking safety seriously. Every single project that we do, our staff is having to balance the safety of our community, whether they're 11-year-olds or 70-year-olds. And as a person may not agree with a particular outcome, but that's a different matter than suggesting that the staff is not considering the safety. I think that's a bridge too far. And so I just want to encourage people to, if they have any concerns about this, the citizen safety is our number one priority. That's all I have tonight.
Rachel?
Nothing tonight.
Nothing for me.
So I wanted to, although I voted against the funding for youth tonight, and I'm not sure the proper way to do this, but I would like for council to consider, in the same way that we have funds set aside for CODA, to have some type of a pool of funds set aside for youth programming. We often talk about how important it is to support youth in our community. This seems like something that we could make happen. My concern, though, is that it would be an open process that folks could apply in the same way that they do to be part of our arts programs. And so I don't know the proper way to do that, but I would like for us to consider that. And if this isn't, if it needs to be brought forward
Budget
in a different way
I think you bring it up at budget time.
at budget.
We'll have
time.
a guideline session, remember, in November or so, and you'll remind us to do that,
Okay,
or how we do that.
okay.
Could she just move to put it on the agenda
As an
at the
item
time
for
of the
budget?
budget session?
She could. Grace will have to remind us to do that then.
Okay.
Go for it.
I would like to move that we consider setting aside some of our council contingency funds for youth programming as part of our 2025-2026 budget process.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Yeah, it might not be a contingency. You might want just funds, right?
Right, or funds.
We have a contingency fund for unknown things. You could
Oh.
take it out of there, or you could make a special category that you want to set aside for yet to be determined. So you have to decide how you handle that.
Okay.
That's why we have the
That point.
contingency fund, but it's for broader use than just youth. So you might want to have a specially earmarked
Yes,
amount
I
for
would like to do
youth.
that.
So we can
So,
talk about
but
it
we'll
budget
talk
time.
about it at budget time.
What's so interesting about this is that a lot of our asset funding is going towards helping families and youth in the community. And so, and I'm interested in this, but I just want to think through this, that it's not as if we're not doing things to help the youth of our community. And so it would be more of a targeted type of programming that we're saying is not within the scope of asset, but we feel is a priority for the community. Am I sort of saying that correctly?
Yes, and I'm open to exploring that as part of that at budget time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right, those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Anything else?
Nothing for me
All
tonight.
right. I have nothing tonight.
I have something.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm sorry, guys. I
No.
have something.
that's
I
good.
have a couple of things. So, I've been talking with some of the senators, and they have proposed November 20th for our joint meeting in the fall. That'll land on a Wednesday in between our Tuesday the 12th meeting and the Tuesday the 26th meeting. They want to see if they want as many of you guys there as possible. So we haven't set anything down in the books yet, but if you guys are aware of any plans that you have during that time, let me know and we can figure something else out. But if that proposed date works for you guys, then student body president and everyone else, they are gonna get on scheduling that and confirming that for us.
yeah,
And
that,
then
go ahead.
some
Just-
other things have.
Well,
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, one more. Give me a second here. I met with the student body president and vice president, and they were very explicit that they really valued and appreciated it when everyone came.
Mhm.
And so
I can make
I think that we have, if we can lock this in now, I would ask council to, we would just honor that because that's something that they really appreciate. That. So will that work? And if it won't work, that's fine. Then let's redirect them to have them look for some other dates. Will that work for everybody?
Works for me.
I have a question. Is the
National League of Cities is the week before,
Mhm.
so
And
Just what I was
Thanksgiving is
gonna
the
ask.
week
13th
after.
Yes.
to the 16th.
16th.
Okay, it sounds like it will work for everybody. We're going to ask them to put it on their calendar. And if you want to just go ahead and if you would then connect with either Grace or with Renee, and she can get it on our calendars as well too and protect that. And what time would that be? 5 or 6 or 5:30? We're going to,
Usually Senate starts at 6, so I don't think it would be a regular Senate meeting, but I imagine it would start at 6.
so our meeting with the student government would be starting at 5 then, right? Or you're going to,
Yes.
but
No, this would just be a special meeting.
They usually start us at 5
usually we started at 5 and went
Yeah.
before their meeting.
before your meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, probably 5. I'll have to talk to Quinn and Martin about it. Just the full details.
right, we'll just-
because I do not have all the details yet.
Let's do this. We'll just ask people to protect the time period of 5 to 7 p.m. And you talk to Quinn and get back to us. All
Sounds good.
right?
Thank you.
Okay.
And then,
Sure.
just with agenda item 27, am I able to share that report? It's the sustainability report with the food waste and the other stuff. Am I able to share that report to the sustainability co-directors for cabinet, just so they're aware of some of
what's going on at the city level with the sustainability?
Absolutely,
aspect?
it's public record. And so you know how to access it from the,
Yeah.
yep, it's public record. You can share it.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
That's all that.
Thank you for joining us remotely, and I'm glad that you jumped in. But I hope your summer's going well.
Thank you. It's going pretty good so far.
Good. All right. Thank you. Now I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
Second.
All right. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried.